Do you have a thumping noise in your vehicle while you're driving? Maybe you feel it in the steering wheel. Could be something in the front suspension, or it could be a tie rod end. Let's check it out. When you determine you have an unusual noise that you're not used to hearing, maybe you can narrow it down to what part of the vehicle you hear the noise. You can pull over somewhere safe, or even pulling into a parking lot and get out and take a quick look at the tire. There could be something obvious. There could be a slipped belt where it looks like the tire is bulging up, or something sticking out of the tire. Another thing to think about is the torque on the lug nuts. Maybe you just had some work done recently and nobody tightened down the tire. So either grab your tire iron out of the trunk of the car, or if you have a torque wrench, and check the wheel torque. Now we've raised the vehicle up in the air. We check the tire over good. Nothing obvious on the tire. Now just grab the wheel right here and right here on the two sides and give it a shake. And if you feel significant play there, then there's something going on with the tie rods most likely. You can almost just take your fingertips, and if you can move it with your fingertips, there's play there. We can actually hear a knocking noise when going back and forth. You won't always hear a noise, but you know there's something up there. Visually looking at the tie rod, you want to see if the boot is ripped. If it is ripped, you're getting the elements in there, sand and dust and dirt, and that's going to cause the tie rod just to wear out or bind up, and that's not going to be good. So you got to replace the tie rod. You can grab the tie rod and give it a shake like that. If you see movement like that, that is definitely signs that it needs to be replaced. Sometimes it's not that obvious when you grab it. If you grab the wheel and give it a shake, you want to take a good look right there, or have someone else shake the wheel while you're doing this. And that's a good indication that the outer tie rod's bad. Now what you can do is grab the outer tie rod, put some pressure on it, and have someone else shake the wheel, and then you can see if there's movement on the inner tie rod end while you're doing that. So we can see that's moving back and forth, and I'm holding it solid on the outer tie rod. So you know there's movement on the inner tie rod as well as the outer. Most of the time, tie rods, it's more of a sensation than a sound. But when you're going on the highway, you may notice that the wheel is shaking back and forth violently. You may think it's something in the tire when actually the tie rod's extremely loose, just like that. Pull the wheel off. Here we have the outer tie rod, here's the inner tie rod, and that's connected to the steering rack. So when you turn the wheel back and forth, it's going to push that inner tie rod out, which pushes on this one, which is how you get your steering to work, which is going to turn the wheel back and forth. The outer's attached to the knuckle, and that's going to pivot the wheel back and forth. On this vehicle, we have a steering rack, so there's a boot that covers the inner tie rod. That's going to keep the elements out of the steering rack and prevent any damage to the steering rack itself. Or you could have a truck that has a steering box where the outer tie rods are just open, and those are a little bit easier to change. You don't have to take the boots off. There is a boot right here, but you can access the bolt part of it on the back. Now let's go ahead and replace these. First thing you want to do is loosen up the jam nut before you take anything apart. Obviously, all vehicles are going to be slightly different, but it's much easier to loosen that up now before we take the lower part of the tie rod end off. Then take this nut off. And if you get this nut starting to spin and then the tie rod itself starts spinning, the socket or the stud starts spinning, what you can do is either heat up the nut Or you can also find a socket that fits on the end if your tie rod's set up like this, and then just use a wrench, loosen that up. That works also. If you're doing just the inside tie rod end, you're going to want to use a special tool that's going to fit on here. That's not going to ruin the boot of the outer tie rod end, and this actually isn't going to work for this vehicle. So what you can do is you could take a hammer and just give it a tap on the knuckle, try to get that to loosen up. If you have a tie rod where the studs go all the way to the end of this, it's probably not the best idea to take a hammer and give it a tap. You're going to mushroom the end over. You could take the nut, just put the nut on. Just so it's flush with the end of the tie rod, and just give it a tap. Loosen that up and then take the nut off. There you go. Now we're going to count the threads when we take this off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 17. So write that number down, because when we go to put this back together, it's going to be closer for the alignment. So you're still going to need to get an alignment when you're done, but at least the wheels will be more aligned than not. Take the jam nut off. And most of the time these are frozen on there pretty good, so you might have to use some locking pliers, lock onto the inner tie rod end, and then use a socket, take that nut off. This one's coming off easy. There's a little clamp on the end of the boot. Just use some hose clamp pliers for most of these. They come right off just like that. Some of them you'll actually have to cut them off and replace them, but this one you don't. And then there's normally a clip on the inside. This one has been replaced before, so there's a wire tie. So we want to cut that wire tie off. And if you had a clamp in there, you can take a pick like this, just try to get underneath the clamp, and then just spread it out. And that should make it loose enough so that you can slide the boot off. But for this one, I'm just going to snip this end off the wire tie, just like that. Slide that off. Then we can grab the boot and just slide it off. And if it looks like it's in good shape, you can reuse it. If it looks like there's any cracking in it, or if it looks old, you might want to replace it. But this one looks pretty good. With the boot off, we can actually see how loose this is. You can move it in and out, and you shouldn't be able to do that. And it shouldn't wiggle that loosely. So that's got to be replaced. They do make special tools that make this job a lot easier. You can get an adapter that fits on here and then slide the tool over, and you can take them off that way. Sometimes they don't always line up. And sometimes you might just be able to find a large enough wrench that will work, or an adjustable, and that's the way you want to go. Just if you have access to it. Now before loosening this up, it's always good to take some locking pliers and lock onto the shaft of the steering rack, because you don't want to put a lot of pressure on the gear when you're loosening this up. So I'll just do that real quick. It's not always the easiest thing to do. And you want to go as close to the tie rod as possible, because you don't want to mar up the shaft at all. If we can get in there. There we go. And then while holding that, we can just loosen this up. Majority of the time, once you get it free, it comes off pretty easily. Now we can install these tie rods. We got these from 1aauto.com. So if you need tie rods or other parts, make sure you head to the website, 1aauto.com, by clicking the link in the description. It's always a good idea to put a little thread lock adhesive on the inner tie rod end right there. You don't want to put it on the ball and socket side, but just get a little bit right on there. And then we're going to tighten it up the same way we took the old one out. Just move these locking pliers a little. And obviously it's a little bit hard to torque this if you have a wrench, but you want to torque these properly for your vehicle. Tighten those up. As you can see, this one, there's no play. You can wiggle it around and it's nice and tight, so that's good. Now we can put the boot back on. You want to put a little bit of grease on the end of this side of the boot, or where it's going to ride right there. So then when someone's doing an alignment and they have to twist this back and forth, this isn't going to bind up and twist. Before I put this on, I am going to use a wire tie. And if you have a new clamp, you can use a new clamp. That works as well. Just got to keep this boot secure. Just get it close to right there. Slide it on. And then to make this a little easier, I'm going to turn the tire on the other side so it pushes itself closer to the rack. About halfway, so pretty much so the wheels are straight. And now that's on. Now I can just tighten this down. Sometimes it's easier just to use some side cutters and just twist. And then I'll tighten it up. Just like that. Just be careful not to cut it too early. If you can get it tight enough so that it doesn't move, that would be ideal. But just snug is good so it doesn't fall off. So that's pretty tight. That's not going to allow any moisture in. We can cut that. Take the clamp, using hose clamp pliers, reinstall that. Once that's all set, and then we can put the jam nut on. Now take the new outer, and we're going to count the threads when we install this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Same as where it was when we took it off. Put that jam nut a little closer. Once that's on, we'll snug that up and line this up with the knuckle. Push it down. For this one, we have a castle nut. Put that castle nut on. Then you want to torque that to spec. And if you have a castle nut, you want to make sure that lines up with the hole for the cotter pin. If it's not lined up, you can tighten it up a little bit more so that it does line up. That looks lined up. Now put the cotter pin in. Never loosen the nut to get the cotter pin to line up. Always tighten it a little more. And one end we're going to bend down. And then we'll just trim the excess. We can trim this a little bit. There you go. And snug this jam nut up. Don't ever assume that when you have an alignment done that the alignment tech's gonna tighten this up, because what if they get the vehicle on the rack and then it ends up being that the alignment's within spec? They're not gonna touch that, so make sure you snug that up good. Now we can put the tire back on, get the lug nuts on. And you can double check your work. It's nice and tight. Now I'm going to torque the wheel to spec. I'll just double check. Make sure you're going in a cross pattern too, so that the wheel gets tightened down evenly. Remember, if you need parts for your vehicle or tie rod ends like these, check out 1aauto.com. You can click the link in the description. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Ring the bell, turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. So you think you may have some bad tie rod ends. Check these out. We got, ready? All right, ready? So you may think you have some bad tie rod ends. Check these out. We got these at 1aauto.com, along with many other